The winter of 1943 pressed against the windows of the German barracks like a living thing, seeping through cracks in the wood, crawling across the floor, settling into the bones of men who no longer had the calories to fight it. Private Klaus Müller sat on his bunk, scraping the bottom of his tin bowl with a spoon that rang hollow against the metal, a sound that had become the anthem of the Wehrmacht's eastern divisions. 300 grams of bread. 2 ladles of watery soup made from frozen turnips and whatever scraps the quartermaster could scavenge. This was dinner for the soldiers of the Reich, the men who were supposed to be conquering the world. At that exact moment, 4,000 miles away in a small town in Ohio, 12-year-old Betty Johnson was complaining to her friends that the cafeteria had served meatloaf again. She pushed her tray aside, a tray laden with hot meatloaf, mashed potatoes swimming in butter, green beans, a dinner roll, and a tall glass of cold milk. The American school lunch program was in full swing, feeding millions of children every day with meals that would have seemed like fantasy to the German soldiers freezing in their barracks. Betty didn't know it, but she was eating better than the enemy's finest warriors. Don't let history be forgotten. Subscribe to the channel so these stories stay alive. The contrast was so stark, so unbelievable, that when German intelligence first intercepted American documents detailing school lunch programs, they dismissed them as propaganda. Surely this was psychological warfare, they thought. No nation at war could afford to feed its children like this while maintaining the largest military machine in history. But the reports kept coming, each one more detailed than the last. Menus from schools in Kansas. Budget allocations from California districts. Nutritional guidelines from the Department of Agriculture. The numbers didn't lie, even when the mind refused to accept them. In the Wehrmacht High Command, there was a phrase that nobody dared speak above a whisper: Die Kinder des Feindes essen besser als unsere Soldaten. The enemy's children eat better than our soldiers. It started as a rumor in the trenches, spread through letters that slipped past the censors, and eventually reached the ears of officers who knew it was true but could never admit it. Because to admit it was to acknowledge something fundamental about the war they were losing, that while Germany poured everything into weapons and conquest, America had somehow found a way to fight a global war while still nurturing its future. The mathematics of hunger are cruel and precise. A German soldier on the Eastern Front in 1943 was officially allocated 3,000 calories per day. In reality, with supply lines stretched thin and constantly under attack, most received closer to 1,800. Breakfast might be a piece of black bread, Kommissbrot, they called it, heavy as a brick and about as appetizing, with a thin spread of artificial fat. Lunch, if it came at all, was more bread, perhaps with a slice of sausage that contained more sawdust than meat. Dinner was the soup, always the soup, with its film of grease on top that might be the only fat they'd see all day. Meanwhile, the United States school lunch program, established just 2 years earlier in 1941, was serving meals that averaged 2,400 calories per day to children aged 6 to 18. Think about that number. American schoolchildren were receiving more nutritional value in their lunch alone than German soldiers were getting in their entire daily ration. A typical American school lunch in 1943 included 2 ounces of protein, real meat, not the mysterious compressed substances that passed for protein in Wehrmacht rations. Fresh vegetables, not the dehydrated flakes that German soldiers mixed with snow to make their soup. Whole milk, rich with fats and proteins that built strong bones, while German soldiers made do with chicory coffee that provided nothing but bitter warmth. The letters home tell the real story. Hans Becker, a corporal in the 6th Army, wrote to his wife in December 1943, "I dream of the potatoes we used to complain about. Do you remember how I said they were too small, too soft? I would give anything for one of those potatoes now. We found a frozen horse yesterday. The meat was already turning green, but we cooked it anyway. It is better than the soup." His letter was found in his uniform pocket after the war. He never made it home. Another letter, this one from Private Wilhelm Fischer to his mother: "The hunger is worse than the cold, worse than the fear. It sits in your stomach like a stone. Sometimes I think about the bread you used to bake, and I have to stop myself from crying." The other men would see. We are all hungry, but we pretend we are not. We pretend the rations are enough. We pretend we are still strong. The American letters from the same period tell a different story entirely. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, a school lunch supervisor in Detroit, wrote in her diary, "The children complained again today about having chicken for the third time this month. If only they knew what children in Europe were facing." But how can you explain such horror to a child who has never known hunger? We served 1,200 meals today. Every child got a hot meal, a glass of milk, and a piece of fruit. The government inspector came by and said we need to increase our vegetable portions. In the middle of a war, we're worried about children getting enough vegetables. The propaganda machine of the Third Reich worked overtime to hide this reality. Goebbels himself crafted the narrative: German soldiers were lean and hard, made strong by discipline and sacrifice, while American soldiers were soft, weakened by excess and comfort. But the propaganda couldn't fill empty stomachs. It couldn't make the turnip soup taste like beef stew. It couldn't magic calories out of thin air. And most importantly, it couldn't hide the truth from the soldiers themselves, who began to see the evidence with their own eyes. When German forces captured American supplies, the shock was visceral. Crates of Spam, processed meat that American soldiers complained about, but that seemed like a feast of the Wehrmacht. Chocolate bars, each one containing more calories than a German soldier's breakfast. Cigarettes by the carton. Coffee, real coffee, not the burnt barley substitute that passed for coffee in the Reich. And the field rations, K rations and C rations that American troops griped about constantly, contained more variety and nutrition than German soldiers had seen in months. Lieutenant Friedrich Hoffmann wrote in his war diary, "We captured an American supply depot yesterday. The men fell upon it like wolves. I tried to maintain order, but how can you tell a starving man to stop eating? Private Krause ate until he vomited, then ate again. We found cans of fruit cocktail. Fruit cocktail. In the middle of a war zone. When I think of our men trying to survive on frozen potatoes and sawdust bread while the Americans ship fruit cocktail across an ocean, it tells you everything about who will win this war. The system that fed American school children was a marvel of logistics and political will. In 1943, while fighting a war on two fronts, the United States managed to provide meals to over 5 million school children every day. The program required 50 million pounds of meat per month, 20 million pounds of cheese, 30 million pounds of butter, and literally billions of bottles of milk. Trains that could have been carrying ammunition were carrying pasteurized milk to schools in rural Alabama. Ships that could have been transporting troops were bringing cocoa powder from South America so children in Minnesota could have hot chocolate with their lunch. The Germans knew about this. Their intelligence services meticulously documented American domestic programs, looking for weaknesses, points of strain that could be exploited. What they found instead was a nation that seemed to have infinite resources, infinite capacity to feed both its war machine and its children. Every report that reached Berlin told the same story: American war production was increasing, American military forces were growing stronger, and somehow, impossibly, American children were eating better than ever. In the German homeland, the situation was reversing. By 1943, German children were receiving rations that would have horrified their parents just years earlier. A child in Berlin received 200 grams of bread per day, 20 grams of fat per week, and meat only when available, which was almost never. Milk was reserved for children under 6, and even then, supplies were erratic. Mothers wrote desperate letters to their husbands at the front, not asking for money or comfort, but for food. "Send anything," one mother wrote. "The children are so thin. Their eyes are too large for their faces." The psychological impact of this disparity cannot be overstated. German soldiers weren't just fighting the American military, they were fighting a nation that could casually feed its children better than Germany could feed its warriors. It was a message more demoralizing than any propaganda broadcast: you cannot win against a nation that has this much excess, this much capacity, this much disregard for the constraints that are destroying you. Support this work so the truth continues to reach people, and make sure you're subscribed. The story of Feldwebel Erich Richter captures the breaking point. In January 1944, Richter's unit captured several American soldiers near Anzio. Standard procedure was to interrogate prisoners about troop movements, defensive positions, military intelligence. But Richter, driven by a hunger that had moved beyond his stomach and into his soul, asked different questions. What did American children eat for breakfast? How much milk did they drink? Was it true that schools served hot meals every day? The American prisoners, confused by the questions, answered honestly. Yes, children drank milk every morning. Yes, schools served hot meals. Yes, there was meat most days, vegetables always, dessert sometimes. Richter's subordinates found him later that night, sitting alone in the snow, weeping. When they asked what was wrong, he said simply, "We have already lost. A nation that can feed its children like that while fighting this war, we have already lost." He was court-martialed for defeatism. The transcript of his trial, discovered after the war, notes that he refused to recant his statement. He was executed 3 days later. His last meal was black bread and turnip soup. The chocolate story is perhaps the most telling of all. In 1943, Hershey's was producing over 500,000 chocolate bars per day for American military rations. These weren't special military-grade chocolate bars, they were essentially the same candy bars being sold to American schoolchildren for a nickel. German forces, meanwhile, had Coca-Cola, a bitter chocolate substitute made with roasted barley and infused with caffeine to keep soldiers alert. It tasted like disappointment mixed with desperation. When German soldiers captured American chocolate, they often couldn't believe it was standard issue. Surely this was officers' chocolate, special occasion chocolate, propaganda chocolate designed to demoralize the enemy. But no, every American soldier had chocolate bars, just as every American schoolchild could buy one at the corner store. The milk program alone tells the story of two different worlds at war. In 1943, American schools were providing fresh, pasteurized whole milk to millions of children every single school day. The logistics of this are staggering, maintaining the cold chain from farm to school, ensuring pasteurization standards, delivering fresh milk daily to tens of thousands of schools across a continent-sized nation, all while fighting a global war. In Germany, meanwhile, milk had become so scarce that it was rationed by the milliliter. Pregnant women got priority, then infants, then young children. Everyone else made do with thin substitutes or nothing at all. Captain James Morrison, an American intelligence officer who interrogated German prisoners, later wrote in his memoirs, "The questions they asked us were heartbreaking. Not about our weapons or tactics, but about our food. They wanted to know if it was true that Americans ate white bread every day. If children really drank milk at every meal. If the stories about school cafeterias were propaganda or truth. When we told them the truth, many simply didn't believe us. How could they? They were surviving on 1,800 calories a day while American schoolchildren were getting that much just at lunch. The numbers, when laid out starkly, tell a story of inevitable defeat. By 1943, the average American schoolchild was consuming approximately 3,500 calories per day across all meals. The average German soldier was allocated 3,000 calories but receiving perhaps 1,800. American children were getting 80 grams of protein daily, German soldiers were lucky to get 40. American children drank 16 ounces of milk with lunch, German soldiers hadn't seen fresh milk in months. The strongest military force in Europe was being outfed by American elementary school students. But it went beyond mere calories and protein. The American school lunch program was building citizens, creating a generation that associated their government with nurture and plenty. Every hot meal served in a school cafeteria was a promise: America takes care of its children. Meanwhile, every empty belly in a German barracks was an accusation: the Reich has failed you. Morale isn't built on speeches and flags alone, it's built on full stomachs and the belief that tomorrow will bring another meal. The turning point, if we can identify one, came in the spring of 1944. As American forces pushed through Italy and prepared for the invasion of France, German forces were literally running on empty. Reports from the front describe soldiers too weak to march full distances, too malnourished to recover quickly from wounds, too hungry to maintain the fierce fighting spirit that had once made the Wehrmacht invincible. At the same time, American schools were expanding their lunch programs, adding breakfast service in many districts, ensuring that no child faced the school day hungry. Private Walter Zimmerman, captured after D-Day, told his interrogators, "We heard the American artillery in the morning, and then we heard something else, American soldiers joking about their breakfast. They were complaining about powdered eggs. Powdered eggs. We were mixing sawdust with our flour to make it last longer, and they were complaining about the form their eggs came in. That's when I knew the war was over. You cannot defeat an enemy who complains about plenty. The contrast became even starker as American forces pushed into Germany itself. GIs were shocked by the hunger they encountered, skeletal children begging for chocolate, mothers offering family heirlooms for cans of Spam, former Wehrmacht soldiers crying at the sight of white bread. The occupying forces quickly established feeding programs for German children, serving them the same meals American school children had been eating throughout the war. The irony was lost on no one. American abundance was now feeding the children of the defeated enemy, providing them with nutrition their own government had failed to supply even to its soldiers. One American sergeant, Thomas Bradley, wrote home, "The German kids gather outside our mess hall every meal. We're not supposed to feed them, but how can you not? They're so thin, Ma. Their eyes follow every bite you take. Yesterday I gave a little girl my chocolate ration and she cried. Not little tears, but sobbing like her heart would break. Over a chocolate bar. I keep thinking about my sister back home complaining about having to drink her milk at lunch." The files recovered from Wehrmacht headquarters after the war reveal the full scope of German military leadership's understanding of the crisis. They knew about the American school lunch program in detail. They had calculated the caloric disparity. They had projected the long-term effects of chronic malnutrition on their forces. And they had concluded, in report after report marked Geheim Reichsake, top secret, that the situation was irreversible. Germany simply did not have the agricultural capacity, the distribution infrastructure, or the economic resources to feed both its military and its civilian population adequately. America, impossibly, had all three in abundance. General Wilhelm Keitel wrote in a memo dated March 1944, "The enemy's capacity to maintain civilian nutrition programs while conducting global military operations indicates resources beyond our ability to counter. We are not merely being outgunned, we are being outfed. This is a war of calories as much as bullets, and we are losing both battles." The school lunch program wasn't just feeding American children, it was winning the war on the home front. Every mother who sent her child to school knowing they would receive a hot, nutritious meal was a mother who could work in a defense plant. Every father who didn't worry about his children going hungry was a father who could focus on his military service. Every child who grew up strong and healthy was a future soldier, worker, citizen who would carry America into its position as a global superpower. Germany, in its total war mobilization, had forgotten this fundamental truth: wars are won by societies, not just armies, and societies are built one meal at a time. Subscribe so these forbidden stories don't vanish again. The testimony of Maria Hoffmann, a German mother who lived through the war, captures the bitter reality. "We heard the propaganda about weak, soft Americans. But my cousin lived in Milwaukee before the war. She wrote me letters about school lunches, about milk programs, about children who wouldn't finish their vegetables because they were full. I burned those letters so the authorities wouldn't see them. They would have been arrested for spreading defeatism. But I knew the truth. A nation that could waste food while we starved, how could we ever defeat them?" The aftermath of the war only reinforced the lesson. As American occupation forces established feeding programs in defeated Germany, they essentially exported the American school lunch model. German children who had survived on turnip soup and sawdust bread suddenly encountered peanut butter sandwiches, glasses of cold milk, orange juice, foods that seemed mythical. The psychological impact was profound and lasting. An entire generation of Germans grew up associating America not with bombs and destruction, but with food and plenty. Hans Müller, who was 8 years old in 1945, later recalled, "The American soldiers gave us our first real meal in 2 years. Hot soup with actual meat in it, white bread with butter, and chocolate milk." Chocolate milk! I didn't know such a thing existed. My father had been in the Wehrmacht. He came home from a POW camp and cried when he saw what the Americans were feeding us. "This is what we were fighting," he said. "Not their armies. This." He gestured at the food. The documents tell us that by the end of 1943, German military intelligence had essentially given up trying to find weakness in American supply lines. Every report painted the same picture: infinite resources, endless capacity, casual abundance that made Germany's carefully rationed scarcity look like what it was, the desperate measure of a dying regime. The Americans weren't just winning the war, they were doing it while barely feeling the strain on their home front. Children still drank their milk, ate their hot lunches, complained about vegetables, and grew up strong and healthy while German children learned what hunger meant. Perhaps the most tragic irony lies in the Nazi ideology itself. The Third Reich proclaimed itself the guardian of racial purity, the protector of German children who would inherit the thousand-year empire. Yet it was these very children who suffered from malnutrition, while American children, children of immigrants, children of diverse backgrounds, children that Nazi ideology deemed inferior, ate 3 square meals a day. The master race was being outfed by democracy's children. The statistics from 1944 make the point with brutal clarity. American agricultural production had increased by 32% since 1940, despite millions of farmers joining the military. The school lunch program had expanded to cover 8 million children. Milk production was at an all-time high. Meanwhile, German agricultural production had fallen by 20%, the ration system was on the verge of collapse, and reports from the Eastern Front described soldiers boiling leather for soup. The contrast wasn't just stark, it was absurd. It was as if the two nations were fighting different wars in different universes, one of scarcity and hunger, one of abundance and choice. A Wehrmacht report from late 1944, discovered in captured archives, contains this observation: American soldier morale remains high despite heavy casualties because they know their families are well fed at home. German soldier morale collapses not from enemy fire but from letters describing hunger at home. We are fighting men who know their children eat well. We are men who know our children starve. This asymmetry of anxiety undermines every tactical advantage we might possess. The ending was written in calories, not bullets. When American forces crossed the Rhine in 1945, they brought with them mobile kitchens that could serve hot meals to thousands of troops daily. German forces defending the homeland were subsisting on whatever they could scavenge: dandelion soup, nettle tea, bread made from acorns and sawdust. The last letters home from German soldiers don't talk about honor or victory or the homeland, they talk about food. They dream about food. They hallucinate food. They die thinking about the meals they'll never eat again. Meanwhile, in America, the school lunch program was planning its expansion for the 1945-46 school year. New menu items were being tested. Nutritional standards were being raised. The great democratic experiment of feeding every child a hot meal was becoming institutionalized, normalized, expected. American parents were beginning to take for granted what German parents would have seen as an impossible dream: the certainty that their children would eat well today, tomorrow, and every day after. The surrender document signed in May 1945 officially ended the war, but the real defeat had come earlier, measured not in territories lost but in calories denied. The Third Reich, which had promised its people prosperity and glory, couldn't even provide them with bread. The United States, which had promised nothing more than life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, delivered hot lunches to millions of schoolchildren every single day of the war. Years later, when historians tried to explain the totality of German defeat, they would point to industrial capacity, to strategic errors, to the overwhelming force of Allied bombing. But veterans knew better. American veteran Robert Hayes said it simply: "We won because we never went hungry. They lost because they always were." German veteran Kurt Wegner agreed: "You cannot fight when you're starving. You cannot win when your enemy's children eat better than your soldiers." We learned that American strength wasn't in their weapons, it was in their milk bottles and lunch trays. The last entry in Klaus Muller's diary, the private we met at the beginning of this story scraping his empty bowl, was found with his body in April 1945. He had survived almost the entire war, only to die in the final weeks. His last words: "I no longer dream of victory or home. I dream only of bread. Fresh bread, like Mother used to make. The Americans are coming. Perhaps they will have bread." They did. The advancing American forces had field kitchens serving hot meals, chocolate bars in every soldier's pocket, and cigarettes to trade. They had everything the German soldiers had dreamed of and more. And back home, American schoolchildren were sitting down to lunch, a meatloaf again, probably, with mashed potatoes and green beans and cold milk, never knowing that an ocean away, their full stomachs had helped win a war. The clatter of spoons in American cafeterias echoed louder than the march of German armies.